I am so excited to bring on the show today my colleague and our senior political reporter in North Carolina for our newsroom, Cardinal and Pine, Michael McElroy. Before we get started in the conversation, we're going to be talking to Michael about the coverage that he and his colleagues on the ground in North Carolina have been doing on the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and the devastation in Western North Carolina, and also the misinformation and disinformation that's been spreading. We're also speaking to Attorney General Josh Stein about today. So just to tee up this conversation, here is a clip of President Trump speaking about the aftermath of Hurricane Helene.
Kamala spent all her FEMA money, billions of dollars, on housing for illegal migrants. They stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from a bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants.
FEMA coming under fire for running low on funds for storm victims while spending $500 million on illegal immigrants.
And FEMA's running low on funds because they're blowing it all on illegals. We're learning how $500 million of FEMA money, your hard-earned taxpayer cash, has been helping out illegal immigrants.
And by the way, it's $1 billion of FEMA money. Biden in 2022 created a program that allows the transfer of FEMA money.
FEMA is out of money, and wait till you hear the reason why. The Biden-Harris administration, we now have learned, raided FEMA's piggy bank for other endeavors. They took over $1 billion of FEMA funds supposed to be available for national emergencies. Leave the money where it belongs, in a lockbox for emergencies when they happen for FEMA. Do the people of Appalachia just not look the right way? Maybe you don't like how they vote historically.
Michael, you've been on the ground dealing with the aftermath and covering it and reporting on it from the storm and the devastation. How did watching that string of clips make you feel?
Well, I know it to be untrue, and so the feeling is maybe a little different. But what it makes me think about is the people that don't know that it's untrue, that don't have the context. And really, the problem with a lot of this is that it's actually there's a lot of moving parts to the answer of why it's untrue and why it's blatantly untrue. And disinformation loves it when the lie is simple, but the truth is a little bit more involved, because people just love to hear the lie and move on.
What I'm really interested in hearing, Michael, from you is we know that disinformation and misinformation spreads like wildfire and spreads very quickly at the local level as well, even if it comes from a national voice or news network. And so talk about the impact that has had that you've encountered on the ground.
Well, the people on the ground, and I should say that Cardinal Pine is on the ground. I have not yet been one of the people that have got into Western North Carolina. My colleague Dylan Roney, as we speak, is doing amazing work right now on the ground, talking to folks. But I have spoken to a lot of folks who have been affected and whose families have been affected. And I will say that most of the people who are dealing with these things right now and struggling to get their water turned on and clear their roads and even make a functional path from their house to the road, they know that FEMA is on the ground, for example. They know that the National Guard has been there. And so really, to me, the dangerous places where this disinformation collects are in the areas that are close by, but may not be the most directly affected yet. So they're close by to be really concerned about their neighbors, but they're not directly affected. There's a tweet. I mean, I know that Trump says these things in rallies. It gets amplified for a national audience on Fox News. But to me, the really dangerous battlefield for this is smaller users with smaller followings, because they're the ones that are doing a lot of the spreading. And there was this particular tweet or a meme that really stuck out at me, because this was several days after the storm, after Governor Roy Cooper had already had multiple press conferences, had already deployed, at that point, it probably would have been a little under 1,000 members of the National Guard, already had declared the state of emergency and the disaster declaration, had already done so much, and it was demonstrably true. And there was someone who posted a tweet that says, has he even held a press conference? Question one. Two, why hasn't he called out the National Guard? And this is someone with a quaint username. I don't think a Russian bot, I really do believe, is a genuine user who is spreading these things. These things were demonstrably true. It could have taken 5 seconds, less than 5 seconds, for her to have figured that out on her own. And so that's where it gets really dangerous, in my view, because that's the kindling that spreads these wildfires. The arsonist is the person who's saying the disinformation, but the good faith spread of wrong information is the kindling that turns it into a wildfire. And so I think that is the thing that I keep talking about, or thinking about the most in all this, is these folks are primed already. And I do believe it's a relatively small amount of people that are primed to believe these things. But they already believe that the federal government is a source of evil and is here to take advantage. So the disinformation reaches that audience because the people who are telling the lies intentionally know that's what their audience believe. We talk a lot at COURIER, we talk a lot about Cardinal, about knowing our audience and meeting them where they are and going to make sure we go to them with the information. Well, so do disinformation actors. They also know their audience very, very well. And so they know that there is already a suspicion of FEMA. So every made up lie that they tell about FEMA then becomes proof to that pre-existing belief about FEMA. And that is why this stuff is so dangerous. And to actually answer your question, because I don't think I answered your question, but the people I talk to are the ones who are on the emergency responders who are on the ground. And it's like we saw in multiple press conferences the other day, even Republican officials saying that this disinformation is harming morale and making it harder for them to do their jobs. So the disinformation isn't just this thing that violates the ideal of truth and justice or whatever. It also makes it harder to bring aid to the people who need it. It also makes it more likely that these people who may distrust FEMA but actually need their help because their homes have been destroyed will not reach out to FEMA to get the aid they need. That is at least in this case, in this Hurricane Helene disinformation case, that is the real danger of this kind of thing.
That's right. And I mean, a big reason that we started COURIER was because we know that disinformation is the most effective and dangerous in a vacuum, right? If there isn't actual good factual information reaching people where they are. So to your point, that is what you guys do at Cardinal Pine and what we do at all of our newsrooms. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, I've been following your reporting really, really closely. It's how I have informed myself about the aftermath. And if you do only follow Cardinal Pine, you see all of the relief efforts. You're hearing from Republican and Democratic elected officials alike in the state who are talking about the incredible support from the federal government, from FEMA, from local and state government and nonprofits and agencies. And you're hearing from people on the ground who are opening up their offices. Or I saw a post you guys did on Planet Fitness becoming a space where people can go get water and resources and supplies. But we know that, you have to actually get that information in front of people. So talk a little bit about how you and the team on the ground think about your audiences and think about that, getting that information to break through when there is so much and to your point, misinformation, information that's spread in good faith, but is wrong because of the disinformation that's been seeded.
Well, it's certainly a challenge, but I think that the thing that makes it possible is having such an outstanding team. And Tara, you get credit for that because you helped build this team. But so the Planet Fitness thing is a good example because it's a straightforward thing. It's just a map of locations where Planet Fitness is opening up their facilities so that people whose homes have been destroyed can get showers, can get things like that. And that was the idea of our newest hire, Jessica Simmons. She's fantastic. And it was a simple thing. It's not some investigative piece, right? We have to do those things too, of course. And we have to do long form. I just wrote 2,000 words on the article version of this disinformation thing, right? But it's not all that. It's these small things. It's knowing how people get their news. It's using the same, honestly, it's using the same tools that disinformation folks use for harm, that people get their news from social media. So we take this one little bit, this very simple idea that can be shared in a visual and in a map, and put it very quickly on all of our sites that go out to the people where they get it the most. And something like the map, they don't have to read that, and they can get the full sense of, hey, look, I live close to this thing. I haven't had a shower in weeks. There is no way they would have known that unless folks tell them about it. And now I can see visually quickly, boom, I went from not knowing what to do about my shower to now knowing exactly what I could do in a matter of seconds. And I think that our team does a great job. And Billy, who is our main person, Billy Baller is our main person, is fantastic about organizing all of us and making sure that we start answering people's questions by asking them ourselves, like, what do people need? What is the biggest need? What is the best authority on that? And how can we quickly tell that to folks? Where are the roads closed? The big one is about what's going to happen with elections, or one of the big ones is what's going to happen with elections, because so much of the election infrastructure was wiped out as well. So the Board of Elections has had meetings, they've had things, and the answers are, I don't know everything yet. So we have to find the best way to tell folks, this is what we know now. We don't know this other thing, but as soon as we know it, we will tell you about it.
I guess part of what I'm just going to reflect on, and we're just discussing is, and I've been writing about this today myself, is how much of the areas that were impacted by Helene are Republican areas that are with Republican politicians, Republican voters, and how MAGA sort of turned on its own people here in a way that makes all this even some ways more shocking and wild. And to see the kind of condemnation that we're now seeing from Senator Tillis and the congressman from Western North Carolina, and you've now started seeing it in DeSantis's administration in Florida, that this monster that Trump created, just like in Springfield, by the way, Ohio, which is a Republican city with Republican elected officials, mostly Republican voters, whose city was being terrorized by the MAGA disinformation. There's something so unbelievably dark about this and malicious and malevolent that it's hard to even believe. I mean, this is people who are, and particularly in North Carolina, right? This is not wealthy people. I mean, yeah, there was Asheville, but I mean, most of the folks in Western North Carolina are not wealthy people. This is not a place of means. And to sort of, when everything has been lost and when their lives are on the line, to intervene in this way feels like an escalation in some ways in their tactics, or a sign of their desperation, right? Maybe is another way to think about it.
I was going to say desperation, right? This
yeah.
down to the election.
And North Carolina was slipping away from them because of Mark Robinson, and they needed to do something to fundamentally alter the trajectory of what's happening there. And so it's also amazing that the RNC chairman, Michael Whatley, is from North Carolina. Laura Trump is from North Carolina. And so senior people running the whole Trump operation are from the state, and that Trump turned on the people of North Carolina. He didn't turn on Democrats. He didn't turn on, in his sick mind, he believed somehow this was going to hurt Kamala Harris, but I think it hurt his own peeps, and I don't know. I've just been sort of stunned.
Well, you have been very nice to ask me on your show, and so I hate to repay that kindness by disagreeing with you.
Okay, go ahead.
And just one piece of it. I am not stunned, and nor do I see it as an escalation in tactic. What I see it is that the scope is bigger because the event is bigger. Hurricane Helene is without question the worst natural disaster that's ever happened to the state. But what he's doing is stuff he's done all the time. It's just that scope of damage is so much bigger that the ripples, as Tara mentioned, are bigger. But Donald Trump has either done these things. Because when I get the sense, when I watch him talk about those things, I don't see a strategy at play. What I see is the same impulse response that he's done kind of his entire career. You talk about, for the people of Springfield, that is a dramatic lie. That is an intense lie. It's something that
they admitted, Michael, right? That JD Vance came out and admitted was a lie.
Yeah.
They don't care.
And it would take a horror novelist a long time to craft that thing. He just off the top of his head did it. And so the people of Western North Carolina, especially, who, other than Asheville, as you mentioned, are in fact deeply, many of them low income. The Medicaid expansion that we recently passed helped a lot of the people in those areas right now. And Medicaid expansion was stalled in North Carolina because of the Republican legislature. And Donald Trump, under Donald Trump's administration, it wasn't even possible, right? Because it took the Biden administration to make Medicaid expansion even possible. So if you look at that, Donald Trump has been hurting those voters his entire political career because of the policies that have been in place. So I think the damage that he has done to those areas is not new. It's not a switch that's just been done. It's not even a dimmer switch that has been bumped up. It's the same poisonous light that he has been casting on these areas for a long time. And so I will say that I don't know that it's an escalation. I think the effects are certainly amplified because the storm is such a bigger deal than a lot of other things. But you do see, as you mentioned, Tom Tillis, you mentioned Chuck Edwards. I think the thing that makes me, they push back against the disinformation, I think, effectively and pretty severely. Even Tim Moore, the House Speaker, has pushed back against some of the more flagrant pieces of disinformation. But zero of them named Donald Trump. Zero of them named Mark Robinson. And Mark Robinson has been one of the biggest spouters of the disinformation here, the more flagrant. I think they're neck and neck for at least in North Carolina specific, for flagrant disinformation over the last week. But zero of the Republicans who have been pushing back against them by name. And so it's kind of like this, there's a lot of disinformation out there. And politically, I kind of get it. Fine, I get it. But there's been a lot of passive voice, this disinformation that has just kind of come up on its own, I guess, as opposed to being launched by someone. But I
Such
think
an important point, Michael. You might want to write a piece on that. I mean, it is because we're giving them credit for pushing back, but they're actually not naming the perpetrators of it, which because of the political implications. So we need to.
I do think they still should get credit. I really do. But the credit with the asterisk that they're not calling out the actual people doing it, and they didn't even mention Fox News. But I will say that you mentioned what the political effect and whether it's. I just don't know. There's a Republican sheriff who was very angry the other day and his pushing back against disinformation. He made the case that this disinformation is harming the morale of the first responders and making things difficult. And he was passionate about it. And he said, I won't apologize. I know it sounds like I'm being emotional. I won't apologize for it. He didn't mention Trump either. And I have no doubt that many folks in that area will continue to vote for Donald Trump. So I don't know what the effect is because it's so easy. Disinformation makes it so easy to separate the disinformation from its source. In fact, it's a cloaking device. It's part of the weaponry is to mask the originator. And so I think a lot of people, just like some Republican in Springfield said something like, I'm still going to vote for him, but I wish he'd knock it off. Right. And I think that disconnect is common. And I think that it will hold true. It's hard for me to imagine a full-on Trump supporter before Helene now going, well, no, now I can't. Because again, this is not a new pattern. Trump has done things like this a million times. And so it's hard for me to imagine. Now, maybe that's just pessimism. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's hard for me to imagine.
No, and I do find a little bit of hope in it, to Simon's earlier point, that it's also just a sign of desperation because they are very worried about North Carolina. This whole election could hinge on North Carolina. He won by a close margin against Biden in 2020. North Carolina hasn't gone for a Democratic presidential candidate since Obama in 2008. It did not go to Obama in 2012. So you guys are also, especially before Hurricane Helene, but obviously continuing through Election Day, covering the elections. There are so many important ones up and down the ballot. I think there is a chance to break the Republican supermajority in the state house in North Carolina that has passed egregious abortion bans, among other really egregious policies in the state that are impacting communities. Talk a little bit about your and your colleagues' conversations with voters. What are you hearing? What are some of the things that are coming up a lot for people in the communities that will inevitably decide by voting or not voting, and certainly by who they vote for if they show up, the state and potentially the whole country?
Well, it is my job as a political correspondent from North Carolina to say definitively that the election will hinge on North Carolina. If Donald Trump loses North Carolina, I've seen very few actual reasonable other paths. So the people that we've been talking to, and we do talk to folks a lot on the ground. Now, sometimes we can talk to, because of just of access of where we are, right? We tend sometimes we try our best to talk to kind of lots of different voters, but sometimes the people that we talk to tend to represent similar concerns or similar demographics or similar areas. But across the board, the people that we talk to, a lot of them mention many of the same things. The economy is a big one. It is. The economy is a big one. Affordability is a big one. And so are abortion rights and reproductive rights. And so are climate change. And so these three things will pop up in most voters we talk to. And this is sometimes across politics. So it's not just we talk to Democrats and they're concerned about Democrat talking points. I mean, everybody is concerned about affordability. And even many Republicans are worried about climate change, even if they can't bring themselves to use the term. They're still worried about the issue for sure. So those are the three big ones. But people are worried about, and people in North Carolina are worried about things that everyone is worried about because there's really big hinge points in this election. But I will say that the things that we have to keep remembering is the storylines have this national narrative, right? And this national focus and threats to democracy from DC. But the people who are worried about it, they're worried about these things in their hometowns. They're worried about it for their neighbors. They're worried about it on their streets. Most people, when they talk about climate change, they will talk about the worldwide story, but then they didn't start to talking about, I'm worried about what's going to happen if my house is flooded. I'm worried about what's going to happen if my town is deluged. Before Helene, one of the biggest climate change worries in Western North Carolina were wildfires. We haven't had one in Western North Carolina the way they have been in others, but the conditions are there. Folks are warning about it. It's only a matter of time, to use that terrible cliche. So people are worried about these things, but they take these national narratives and they express that concern at the local level. And that's one of the things that we try and do in our coverage, is try and match these national concerns, these national narratives to the people where they are and how they're living their lives and what they then can do about it from their street at their voting precinct.
Such important.
It's amazing
work.
stuff. I know. It's amazing stuff you guys are doing.
Thank you, Michael, so much for joining us and for all the work you're doing on the ground. For folks who are in North Carolina or who have friends or family there, tell them to follow Cardinal and Pine and Michael's great reporting. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Thank you.